One thing is very clear. Netanyahu's meeting with Trump in Washington was not just a protocol photo. It was a direct discussion about where the red line with Iran is and what happens if those negotiations stall. Greetings, I'm Ari. The board is moving very fast. Look at the big picture. On one hand, Netanyahu travels to the United States and sits down with Secretary of State Marco Rubio at Blade House. On the other hand, Trump receives Netanyahu at the White House. And the underlying issue, even though they also talk about Gaza and the region, is Iran. What is being negotiated, what is not being negotiated, and what happens if an agreement is not ultimately reached, and a detail that cannot be overlooked. Before the meeting with Trump, Netanyahu formalized Israel's joining of the so-called Peace Council for Gaza, promoted by the Trump administration. That, in simple terms, is a political signal. Washington is trying to build a regional framework for the day after in Gaza, while at the same time keeping an eye on the Iranian front. And of course, the main protagonist in all of this, since we're talking about Gaza. And a peace council for whatever happens in Gaza, which is anchored within Israeli territory, is obviously Israel. And finally, the media says that Netanyahu traveled to confirm the agreement. Did Netanyahu really travel just for that? Can you tell me what you really think now? What was actually said at the White House? Don't expect a statement with fireworks, because so far there isn't one and there won't be one. What we're seeing in American and Israeli media is that there weren't any big announcements, but there was a consistent message. Trump insists on continuing to push for talks with Iran, and Netanyahu insists that Israel's security is non-negotiable. In other words, they talk, they coordinate, but they don't necessarily think the same way about the pace or the method. And this is where what many people feel comes in, even if it's not always said out loud. This express trip and this extraordinary meeting are a sign that even if the official version sounds normal, and they traveled to sign an agreement and hold protocol meetings of what's happening in the region, that is, everything very much within the diplomatic framework, under the table, what might be moving or is obviously moving. Let's not be naive. These are reports, evaluations, and coordination at the highest level, like someone adjusting every piece before a storm. Not because someone wants a war, but because the situation can escalate very quickly. And what if the tension with Iran turns into something direct? Obviously, nobody wants to be left without a plan, without support, and without synchronization. In fact, Trump has been saying that his preference is to reach an agreement, but with a huge caveat. If there is no agreement, the military option is on the table. And when Trump talks about an agreement, he's not just talking about uranium and centrifuges, he's also talking about the issue that, for example, in Israel is very concerning: ballistic missiles.
We need to make a deal or it'll be traumatic. We had a very good meeting yesterday with Bibi Netanyahu. It's ultimately up to me. If the deal isn't a very fair deal and a very good deal with Iran, then it's going to be, I think, a very difficult time for them.
Let's see if the June war left us anything. That 12-day war. The ballistic missile isn't just a theory. It's a real object that falls from the sky and changes lives in seconds, according to assessments and estimates that have been published in Israel these days. Before that operation, it was estimated that Iran had around 3,000 ballistic missiles and was expanding its capability. During the war, Iran reportedly fired around 550 missiles and targeted depots, production facilities, and launchers, many of which were already loaded with missiles. So it's estimated that at least half of the missiles were destroyed. So what's the point today? Well, Iran, even after that blow, still has a very significant number of missiles, and what's more concerning is regaining its production capacity. According to Israeli sources, there's an updated assessment that within weeks, Iran could once again have between 1,800 and 2,000 long-range ballistic missiles, fully available and operational. This isn't just for one day, that's an amount that defines the entire strategic conversation. But then, what is being negotiated with Iran? Is it just the nuclear program, or also the missile factory and the attack doctrine? Well, Trump, in his latest statements, made it clear that for him, the agreement must also include the ballistic aspect, ballistic. And if we translate that into everyday language, it means it's no use signing something that leaves Iran with the ability to fire hundreds or thousands of missiles at the region. And we must be very clear about something in all of this that we're seeing. We will never see Trump, Netanyahu, or even Khamenei himself from the Iranian regime appearing in the media to tell things as they are. They will always come out and say what needs to be said, depending on the moment and the cards each one is playing on the table. Let's not lose sight of the fact that this is a matter of geopolitical and military strategy at the highest level. And of course, everyone is looking out for themselves and their own interests. Today, President Trump himself posted on his social network that he ordered a second group of aircraft carriers to get ready to head to the region. Before I dive in, I want to share with you the story of this vial, which amazed me, and I think you should know about too. This vial holds an unbelievable story that was unheard until now. Inside is earth from the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, rescued by archaeologists after thousands of years of history were dumped as rubble. It is our opportunity to prevent history from disappearing. Start the new year with a personal connection to Jerusalem. Click the link in bio or scan the code to enjoy a special offer. United States ship George H.W. Bush, which would join the United States ship Abraham Lincoln Group that's already operating here in the region. And this is important because of the timing. We have to realize that moving an aircraft carrier isn't like just ordering an Uber and having it show up the next day, especially on the other side of the world. They're talking about preparations and transit times that push any major decision into the coming weeks, even into the month of March. So, at first glance, we could conclude that they'll wait until this new aircraft carrier arrives in the region, which will take us to mid-March. So, could someone say that eventually the attack is postponed until this date? Well, maybe yes, or maybe not. Maybe it's just rhetoric, a strategy to make people believe that. What is clear is that neither you nor I will ever know what will happen tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, or next week. What we have left is to watch, to observe the day-to-day developments and follow the events as they unfold. Without speculations, but simply giving a good reading of what is happening. With all this, we can also say that officially diplomacy continues, of course, but the military muscle is being prepared in case diplomacy fails. Now let's put this in perspective. When a country amasses ships, defenses, and capabilities in an area like the United States is doing, it does this for two reasons. Either because it wants to avoid a war by showing strength, that is, by generating pressure, or because it is preparing for a war if there is no other option, or if, in the end, those intentions were there from the beginning. And, at the same time, a piece of information from Iran which also needs to be looked at carefully. The Iranian president, Pezeshkian, said that Iran would be willing to open its nuclear facilities for inspection as a way to show that they are not seeking a nuclear weapon. That, well, sounds good and very diplomatic, but the problem is that what is said in a speech, honestly, doesn't really materialize in the real world. And not because we distrust Iran, but simply because that's how it has been throughout all these months. Because it's also been pointed out that international inspectors have had a lot of trouble getting into certain strategic underground sites that were hit in 2025, and that's where credibility is at stake. And in Iran's case, it's already simply labeled as the boy who cried wolf. The reality is that these kinds of announcements often aim to buy time, ease pressure, or simply divide positions among the allies. And we have to point out that after Trump's statements from Iran, statements have already been made saying that they will not give up their atomic development and they will not give up their missiles either. And seen this way, very simply, like someone doing shop math, well, there's nothing more to talk about here. The United States sets some conditions, and Iran says that those are not negotiable. Fine. Meanwhile, here in Israel, the focus is not only on what Iran says, but on what Iran can do. And that's why I want us to connect now with another important news story these days. Air defense. The Ministry of Defense announced that Israel has completed advanced tests of the David Sling system, incorporating operational lessons learned during wartime. For those who aren't clear, Israel has a complete air defense shield with different layers. The Iron Dome, the most well-known, is for short-range threats, like those fired from Gaza or those fired from Lebanon. Then, David's Sling, which has been undergoing tests, which is an intermediate layer for longer-range missiles and rockets, and also for threats like cruise missiles and drones. And then there's the Arrow, which is for long-range ballistic threats. Other types of technologies have also been integrated into this, such as lasers. But why are these trainings and these tests making news? Well, it's because when you see Iran rebuilding its missile development capabilities, and at the same time Israel is improving its systems, it's like watching two teams training before a match that no one wants to announce yet. Also, it's mentioned that during the June conflict, the David Sling was even used to intercept projectiles fired from very long distances, something that was historically more associated with the other layers of the system, with the Arrow systems, or even with those that are in cooperation with the United States, the famous TAT. And this, well, brings us to a simple idea. Israeli air defense is not a gadget. It's literally a system that buys life-saving time and sustains the economy in moments when the country could simply come to a standstill. Or, if it were any other country, it would simply collapse. And let's move to another front, which sometimes isn't talked about much, but is vital. The sea. The Israeli Navy carried out a large-scale maritime exercise today with warships, submarines, Shaggy 13 commandos, Air Force support, and cyber units. What were they training for? Responses to maritime attacks, aerial threats, and defense of offshore gas platforms. This, to put it simply, is Israel saying, we're not only concerned about what comes from the air from the east, we're also worried about what could happen at sea and against our energy. Because if something happens to the gas platforms, that's not just an isolated military event, that's a direct and strategic blow to the infrastructure and economy of the people of Israel. All right, now, before we move on to the news about the irony in Venezuela, I ask you to check right now if you're subscribed to the channel. Most of you think you're subscribed, but you're not. You just need to hit the subscribe button, and that's it. A lot of people even write in the comments that the subscribe button doesn't show up for them. Check if the same thing happens to you and go ahead and tap the bell so you'll know when I upload a new informative video. Alright, let's continue and move on to Venezuela then, where today some very striking images went viral of a reception in Caracas for a United States delegation. Something unthinkable with a red carpet and music. The point isn't the show, the point is the meaning. The United States Secretary of Energy, Chris Wright, was in Caracas and talked about discussions to move forward with a three-phase plan from the Trump administration: stabilization, recovery, and reconciliation. There was also talk of transition, and here is something that caught a lot of attention because of how direct it was. From Washington, the authorities handling the transition are being treated as an interim leadership, not as a definitive government. In other words, the United States is getting fully involved in the Venezuelan energy sector with an economic objective and, according to them, a political one as well. What does this have to do with Israel and Iran? Quite a lot, because in the real world, energy is not just gasoline. Energy is geopolitics. It's about sanctions. It's about allies. It's about leverage. It's about how much a country can withstand and how much a region can endure. And along the same lines, while all this is happening in Venezuela, there's a direct piece of news involving Israel. For the first time in many years, Venezuela is sending oil to Israel. That's how crazy things are. So, what if the United States is looking to reactivate and regulate Venezuelan oil? That's also a move for the global market, for the price, and for their room to maneuver. When it puts pressure on other players, and when actors that were previously unthinkable get involved, like what's happening now with Venezuela sending oil to Israel. So yes, Caracas is also part of the conversation. And the irony of this visit, which is already historic and was unthinkable just a few months ago. It's how we see Daisy Rodriguez welcoming the United States Commission with great fanfare. And well, that's not bad, obviously. There's no problem with that. Every country welcomes its guests however it wants. The thing is what Daisy Rodriguez said some time ago, and I want you to listen to it yourself so you can understand the level of irony we're living through right now.
Don't you dare, because we will be your worst nightmare and the worst Calamities for the American people are yet to come. If they dare to attack the people of Bolivar, they should be very clear about that.
All right, that's how things are right now. We are seeing diplomacy in Washington, military preparations at sea and in the air, and public messages saying we want an agreement. And at the same time, a clock that doesn't stop, the clock of Iran's ballistic capability. The question isn't whether the issue will cool down. The question is who will manage to impose their conditions before the window for maneuver closes. Thank you for staying with me until now. If the video helped you understand a bit better what's going on, then subscribe, share the video, and don't leave without giving it a like.